Okay, here we go. Yeah, let's get started. Okay, are you all seeing my screen on your end? Excellent. Okay. All right. Welcome
Yes.
everyone to our virtual members meeting. So to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today, we'll go through the grants programs. So updates on recent awardees from our three different grants programs and some reminders about upcoming deadlines for a couple of the big grants that are coming up. Updates from the Journal of Field Ornithology, so our publications committee and co-editors in chief are here with us today. Is Patrick with us today? Hopefully, yes. Okay, I
Yes,
see
he's
you
there.
nodding. Awesome. So a lot has been going on at Avanet. Patrick's going to fill you in there. Sarah is going to provide an update on the finances, and then we'll hold elections and talk about the upcoming meetings. So as of today, we actually have some nice news for next year's meeting. So it's very timely that you're all joining us. And of course, we're going to cap this off with a presentation by our hopefully freshly elected Vice President, Dr. Jennifer Smith, who's joining us directly from the field today and has promised chachalakas during the meeting. So we'll see if she makes good with her promise during this. Okay, so a few years ago, Julie, one of our past presidents, who's going to join us here in a little bit, encouraged me to start off with a fun little quiz. So we did this last year and the year before, and I've got some photos here that are both timely for the season, as well as maybe some hints to what might be AFO related in the near future. So if you want to chime in, feel free to just hop on your mic or enter things in the chat. Um, Two of these, I think y'all should probably get on pretty quickly. Third one there might be interesting discussion. No, Rafa, you're close, but yeah, Stephanie, we're going to need some more specifics. All right, Sarah's got it. Yeah, we've got Viri on the left. So this was at our banding station here in southeastern Ohio. Common in the middle. So this is a sort of advertisement for our joint meeting with the Wilson Society. So this is a nice bird that you can see easily in Newport. Last time we had a meeting there in 2014. This was a lifer for me, I believe. So yeah, pretty easily seen there. So we've got some molting hooded warbler. No, you maybe got the last part of that equation right, at least. Yeah, so leucistic, yes. We don't, I don't think that's the correct species ID on there, but it's a really good guess. I don't know for sure. We haven't ruled that one out for sure. We're meeting. Um, this was a collision bird that hit a building in downtown Columbus last week and was alive. It's a little far north for Swainson's warblers, although we do now have them breeding in southern Ohio, down at Shawnee State Forest. Um, Worm eating is a pretty solid guess. We were also thinking it might be Tennessee, but it's partially leucistic and it's in care. As far as I know, it's still in care at the Wildlife Center, so I'm hoping we can get some more information on this bird. But anyway, every morning, so we have a Discord server for collision survey monitors, and most of them don't know how to identify birds, but they love helping out, and they usually send bird photos for us to help identify. And I hadn't quite had enough coffee when this one ran across my computer the other morning. So interesting bird for sure. Maybe I'll have an update on that one later on. Scott, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the Bergstrom grants.
Okay.
Another good year for Bergstrom grants. We were able to award $9,150, which is the most that we've ever had for Bergstrom awards. This is thanks to a strong stock market and dividends on our investments there. We gave one grant to a non-academic applicant, which is important because Bergstrom himself was a non-academic. He actually came from the insurance industry, but he was an avid bird bander and conservationist. And this went to a researcher chef in Massachusetts. Two awards to undergraduates, and I'll flip to the next slide, if you will. And then the remaining grants went to six master's degree candidates with a variety of projects. So we had the usual thrill of being able to award funds to really interesting projects and the agony of not having enough money to fund all of the worthy applicants. Perhaps something we'll work on in the future. And the last thing I'll say is I'm turning the administration of this grant after several years over to Maria Pacheco, and really looking forward to working with her as she takes over and keeps this going forward. It's a great grants program.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Okay, Scotch research grants. I believe I saw Cecilia with us. We can't hear you, Cecilia. It looks like you're not muted, so maybe audio issues.
Yeah, it looks like she's having audio issues. But she is here.
Okay.
But in the chat, she's having audio issues.
Okay. Not to put you all on the spot, but Judith or Maria, is there anything that you could maybe say in place of Cecilia for this grant?
Cecilia, if you don't mind, I can jump right in and talk about this.
Thank you, Judith.
All right. So these are the 2025 awardees for the Scotch Research Grants, which are also 1,500 awards. They're similar in size to the Bergstrom Awards. And the committee was able to make 7 individual awards. You can see here some statistics about the applications. We were really lucky to receive 25 applications. It's wonderful to see so much interest from undergraduate, master's, PhD students, postdocs, and non-academic applicants as well. There were 5 countries involved. Just a reminder that this is open to any applicants from America at large. And the committee was able to make 7 awards, 3 full grants and 4 partial grants. So depending on the size of the budget that they were requesting. 5 of these went to PhD students, 1 to master's students, and 1 undergraduate. And right now we are actively right in the middle and running up to the finish line of the 2026 grant process. And the applications are going to be due June 15th. And then the next slide, I think you can see the projects. So you can see here too, it's a variety of very exciting projects from different areas, with different species, different study regions. And another reminder that the applications here can be submitted in not only in English, but also in Spanish or Portuguese. So we encourage people to apply even if they feel like their application might not be as strong in written in English. That's it for Scotch research.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. And just a reminder, if anybody would like to see more information on these recipients, you can visit our websites, both under the grants section as well as blog posts. There's more information highlighting all of these researchers and the projects that they're working on. So with that, Joe, if you're there, I'd love to have you talk about the big one here.
The Scotch Keystone, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fab. So I don't have the exact details of how much we gave out last year, But essentially, we awarded 3 grants, totaling somewhere in the region of about 30,000. So similarly to the Scotch grants, we are supporting researchers doing research in the neotropics. And the really cool thing about this grant is that you don't need to be tied to an academic institution to apply. So it also supports projects that are sort of being spearheaded by professionals and other individuals working outside academia. It's also worth mentioning again that applicants can apply in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So we currently have the Scotch Keystone grant cycle open at the moment. And the application for the 2026 cycle is online. We currently have a deadline of June 15th, and we're hoping to make decisions sometime mid-July on that. So all of those, the instructions and everything are up on the website at the moment. If you flip on to the next slide there. That's great, thank you. So last year, as I said, we were able to support, I think we received around about 20 applications. And from those 20, we ended up supporting 3 really different but really fantastic projects. So the first project was led by Lorena Cruz Bernati, who's a professor of biology at the University of Valle in Colombia. So I've got a couple of notes here. Her project focused on the declining crested ant tanager, which is an understudied Colombian endemic. And really, she was trying to understand the species' natural history, its habitat use, and things about its territorial behavior and vocal communication. So she was aiming to understand and inform these future conservation strategies. Sorry, she was trying to understand that to inform future conservation strategies, should I say. We also supported a project by Vanessa Salas. This individual was an environmental scientist and conservation researcher from Venezuela. So she was looking at reproductive ecology and nesting behavior in burrowing owls. And she was really interested in looking at how disturbance, particularly urbanization, and agricultural development was affecting their nesting behavior and success. So we really liked that project because Vanessa had a lot of ties to broader international efforts to look at or to better understand those populations of burrowing owls. And then last but not least, we supported Christina Cockle. She's a research scientist who's based in Argentina, and she has been studying cavity nesting birds in the Atlantic forest for a very long time. And her project aimed to look at the evolution of parental care in furnarids. So she was using long-term monitoring data to look at trade-offs in reproductive success. We've got predation risk and parental investment. We really liked this project because she had a really strong emphasis on sort of collaborative community-based field research. So lots of exciting things that came last year, and we're really excited to see what projects come this year. I think I'm stepping in as co-chair on this grant this year after Alyssa. So I'll ask you if there's anything that I missed out, please feel free to jump in.
No, thank you so much. In the meantime, I did look up the total grant awarded for Scotch Keystone last year. It was a little bit over $26,000 for these 3 awards. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Thank you both. Exciting to fund these projects. Rafa and Mark, turn it over to you to talk about JFO.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go first. So we hired Phil Stouffer as editor after a very successful search. This is the 4th search I've been involved with for an editor of an ornithological journal. And it was a very good competitive pool. And we narrowed it down to 4 people on a short list that we interviewed, and you can see who the search committee was on the slide. And after sort of a tough decision, we decided to hire Phil Stouffer, who's going to be an excellent editor, comes with a lot of experience in different systems and different parts of the world. So he and Rafa will be the team of co-editors now. for the Journal of Field Ornithology. And Phil is, of course, replacing Mark Halver. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
I don't think I did it. I don't see Mark on, but I'm not sure if he's on. But we've thanked Mark for all his work and staying with the journal, helping us through some tough times. With the loss of an editor before that, and taking on a lot more work. So he's been just a fabulous editor for us, and we will miss him.
Yeah.
And I think Rafa is going to talk about some journal statistics.
Yes. Please, next slide.
Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome.
So Phil took over in March as a co-editor-in-chief, and it seemed like the year started slow. Overall, we had a similar amount of papers as last year, same period. We only had 9 less papers than last year, but the overall outcome is the same. We have 38 accepted or published papers so far this year. So I think that we are just losing a few papers that were not accepted. And when we break down the number of the acceptance or rejection rate, we can see that we are rejecting most of the, we are getting submission. I don't know how to say this without without getting in trouble, but we are not getting good quality papers from many parts of the world that are not, global north. So it is very important that you, as part of the grants committee, follow up with the grantees and invite them and ask them to submit their completed research to our journal once it's finished. So we complete the cycle of funding research and then having them sending their research to our journal and hopefully get it accepted. That's another part and another different process, of course. So I would love to see more manuscripts from Latin America and from the global South overall, and of course more papers from these parts of the world published as well. But unfortunately, so far we are not. There's something going on that we are not getting good quality papers. So we need to focus on those areas. So if you have colleagues working or in those parts of the world, please ask them to send their manuscripts to our journal.
Yeah, and as a reminder, we do offer an editorial assistance program to help people with translations and getting their manuscripts into better shape. So that is a free service that is offered through the society. So for those of you who are reaching out to colleagues in South America, please remind them that we do have that service available for folks.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Rafa. Patrick, are you with us today?
Hello, Matt. Hello, everybody. I'm
Hey,
here.
Patrick.
Yeah, nice to see everybody. As I think everyone knows, Avanet Research Supplies is AFO's business for research supplies. I'm very happy to be here and in a role to support the mission of Avanet, which we've posted here. I think very briefly, I would like to introduce our operations manager who came on board last February and has crested into his second year. He's been instrumental in making 2025 a success, where a number of things happened that I'll talk about in a minute. But I wanted to introduce Peter Griffin, who's sitting here with me today. We can advance the slide, Matt, or maybe I can do that.
No, you have to tell me.
Yeah. Well, 2025 was a big year for Avanet. We moved into a new facility. Basically, the same week you all were hopefully enjoying talks and exploring the lovely Ogden area. So it was quite a process to locate a space and move. And some of you are well aware of this information, but As you know, we are a small team of 2 full-time staff and 4 production staff, and we were able to make that transition very smoothly with limited downtime for our production of mist nets, and limited impact to our budget, which is always positive. We are still actually kind of getting settled into the space and learning the space. It's a little larger, which allows us to do a little bit more, making some custom nets and longer nets. One brief note about that is we have had some custom orders that in the past we have had to decline because we weren't able to make them. But now we're able to make some of those longer nets and double and triple high nets with our team here. So that's been a really positive thing for our customers and researchers. A quick synopsis of what I like to think of as the impact of AVANET on the research community is that we last year shipped nearly 1,900 shipments to researchers in 26 countries. We talk a lot and spend a lot of time thinking about the finances of the business and staying above water, but I think it's really, really important and valuable for AFO to see and understand the impact that we're having on the research community, which includes both ornithologists and bat biologists who truly rely on us for goods that are essential for conducting their work. On site, in our other facility and here, and with our 2 remote contracted staff, we produced 4,741 mist nets. We sold a little bit fewer than that last year, but that sets us up for a strong season here in 2026, which is looking very good. I do want to talk about the essential leadership and support from a group of ARS board directors, and that list includes David Cersali, Ryan Heck, John Day, Bob Hogue, Matt Schumar, Rebecca Brasso, Sarah Sargent, who's seen here in our new facility on a nice visit, and of course, Dan Ardia, who is the board chair and has been supporting ARS's navigation through many courses of events since 2016 and even prior to that in the planning purpose. As we look ahead, we're excited about being able to support researchers with some custom net offerings and continue to serve those needs. We're also looking at opportunities to explore distribution relationships in other countries to facilitate the transport of nets and research supplies into those countries. So we'll look forward to meeting with Rafa this winter in Mexico. We also are working with some AFO volunteers. Scott Johnson in particular has put together a document that outlines challenges and goals related to producing color bands. So that's something that has been on the burner for a while, and Scott has taken a tremendous effort to dive into that, and there's more to come there as well. And it's going to be a great process. From a sort of business and financial side, we are able to support AFO. We're working on a number of challenges to the business as that we're all facing tariffs. We're looking at ways to adjust pricing to ensure that AVANET can meet the goals to support AFO's bottom line and grant programs and operations as we move forward. So always keep us in mind when you're trying to order anything or talking to folks, or if you have ideas in the field, you can always reach us through our website or contact me directly. And that's where I wanted to leave things. I think Sarah has a little bit of additional information on the sort of financial impacts and stuff from AFO. Thanks everybody for all the support and for the opportunity to work for and with you and everybody that we serve.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick and Peter as well. you guys are doing great stuff there, and we're excited to, have AVNet serve the community and continue to serve AFO's mission. So thank you for all you do.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. And so that transition kind of leads us into our financial situation, and our treasurer, Sarah Sargent, I believe is going to give us a brief update on that today.
Yeah, I'm not going to. Yeah, our last meeting we had in January, we did talk about the budget in more extensive detail, and right now we're mid-year, and it's, everything's kind of in motion. So this isn't really an ideal time to talk about anything. But this is just basically where our bank accounts all stand at the end of April. We have two endowments, the general endowment and the Bergstrom Scotch endowment, which is used for funding the grants that we just heard about. And then we have our operations account. The ARS has operating and a cash reserve for emergencies. So those are our main sort of holdings at this point. And that's, we're doing pretty well. We are pretty much on track with our budget at this point. But like I say, it's mid-year. It's hard to say what. I don't have everything's sort of in process at the moment. But we're doing okay. Our investments have been going up just because of the way the stock market has been. So that's always nice to see. But I'm going to put in a little plug that if you are in your 50s or 60s and considering doing some estate planning or writing a will, be sure to consider putting some money towards enhancing our endowment. Not to be too competitive, but the AOS has a $33 million endowment. So if you think this looks like a lot of money, we'd like to catch up with them. So please do consider putting a bequest or some other form of donation towards AFO, so we can continue doing things like supporting the grants that we do and other things. We have supported the North American Banding Council this year. We will be supporting the Ornithological Council in another month or two. And there are other things and we do support a lot of student travel going to meetings and council travel going to meetings. So there's lots of good things that the money goes to. That's enough of my plug for now, and we can move on from that.
Yeah, I'll just sort of echo Patrick's comment and really thank our team that are helping to lead investments. So our investment trustees, which is a slightly different team, some overlap there, as well as our team of investors at Merrill Lynch as well. They're just fantastic to work with and have allowed us to keep our heads pretty stable, or our finances pretty stable in fairly unstable times right now. So yeah, thanks to all those folks that are helping us kind of keep doing the things that we've been doing so well. Before we get to elections, I want to take a moment to thank the folks that are stepping off of council that have served over a number of years. So Allison Jackson, Allison, I believe you're there. So give everyone a nice wave. Thank you so much for all you've done. You've been a real joy to have on council, and we're all sad that you're finishing up your term, but really thank you for completing 2 terms on council. Natasha Fontaine, who's also stepping off a little bit early, as she's been kind of getting tied up into field work and really hasn't had the time to dedicate that she wanted to. So she's sort of ending her first term a little bit early. But Natasha was also extremely helpful to have on council, and we'll miss her presence and contributions as well. And I really want to give a huge thanks. I'm not sure if she's joined us quite yet. I know she was going to run. She has. Okay. Julie, thank you so much for all you've done. This was my president who brought me onto the executive committee and has really given so much to AFO. And so I want to give a huge thanks to Julie for everything that she's done over the last many, many years. So thanks to all those folks. Before we move on into elections, I failed to launch one of the polls at the beginning. We do need to make sure that we have a quorum for elections and for everything. So Hopefully you're all seeing a poll on your end. I see people staring at the screen, so I'm going to assume that's a yes. So we need to reach a quorum here. So if you are a current AFO member,
Matt, this is asking us to approve the nominees.
oh darn it. So
Matt, we do have a quorum. A quorum is 15 and we have 43 people participating. So I think most of them are AFO members. So we should be okay with that.
I can launch it. Thanks for showing me that multitasking here poorly. Okay, you can put in the chat and I can download that later. If you are an AFO member, just say I'm a member in the chat, and we'll be able to gain that information. So with that, before we get to that, I do want to mention that these positions on AFO Council are really important. We are doing, or attempting to do anyway, a lot of stuff through this very small society. So the list of committees there, which you can find on our website. If you are an AFO member and would love to get involved in any one of these committees, our counselors who are chairing these would love to have your participation. So have a look at our website and look at this long list of committees. And I do want to thank this group of people who have continued to give a lot for the society. We are a small group, but I feel like we make a really large impact to the community. So everybody's doing a lot. So thanks to the AFO Council for that. Okay, before I relaunch elections, I'll turn it over to Rebecca to introduce our slate of nominees, both to the executive committee as well as to council.
Do I introduce myself?
You don't have to do that.
Okay. So we do have some changes coming just because of rotations off and other changes for some of our executive committee. And so you can see those folks for executive committee who have been nominated listed here on your screen. Myself moving into the role of president, Jen Smith moving in as vice president. We are adding in, or sort of have rearranged the secretary role. In the past, we have had a secretary and assistant secretary to allow Scott a little bit more time to pursue some things with color bands as well. He is going to move into the assistant secretary role, and we have invited David Aborn to the role of secretary, and so they will share in roles of that position. And then Sarah remaining on as our treasurer.
I failed to edit their information there. Jen is not at Powder Mill and David is not in California, but hopefully you know them very well.
Oh, yeah. Jen is at Texas A&M University in Kingsville, and David is in
University of Tennessee, Chattanooga.
Tennessee, right.
Yes. So that's a good spoiler and a transition. So I'm gonna frame it as a transition or a segue into nominations for council.
And then since we have had a few council members either complete their terms or be stepping down, we are very excited to have two new individuals nominated to join council. Karina Sanchez, who is at CSU Dominguez Hills, and Luke DeGroot, who is at Powder Mill Nature Reserve.
Yeah, so with that, I will make a motion to accept the slate of nominees to executive council or executive committee and council. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Now let me relaunch this poll. Hopefully I can do that. Yes. Okay, so it'll clear the results. So fresh poll, the correct one. If you are an AFO member, please vote here. Okay, I think we are there. So we are at Should be able to share the results. Scott, can you see that?
Yes,
Okay, so
but I'm no longer secretary. So ask David if he can.
David.
At this moment, at this moment, he will no longer be taking notes.
Yep.
David, I hope you wrote this down.
So
It'll
we
be
have
easy to remember.
unanimous, the 35 members that are
So my
joining us.
first official act, yes, I can.
Wonderful. Welcome aboard, Luke and Karina.
Yes.
Excited to have you on the AFO Council and look forward to meeting you in person sometime soon, hopefully in Newport. All right, so congratulations, President Brasso.
And I should say, even though we didn't have a goodbye slide for Matt, having been vice president under Matt and worked with Matt for a number of years here, I think that those of us and those of you, I should say, who have worked with Matt for, I think, like the 46 years that he has served AFO, that Matt has done an incredible job and tackled many, many challenges along the way. You have been great to work with. You are still going to be great to work with in serving your role as past president. But we do appreciate all the work that you have done for AFO as well.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay, that said, so looking forward, for those of you, hopefully most of you are aware and have the intention to sign on and register or are in the process. Our meeting this summer is a joint meeting with Wilson Ornithological Society in Newport, Rhode Island, going to be held at Salve Regina University. And you can see there that beautiful campus right on the ocean. The meeting will run the 7th through the 9th. Early bird registration closes May 31st, so you have a little bit less than a week to go ahead and get those early bird prices for registration. Okay. We have 2 exciting plenaries. So this meeting, July 7th, is going to be council meeting and workshops, and then it's actually a 2-day scientific program. So the 8th and the 9th, both of those days will be scientific program. Right now, last check, there were between talks and posters, 99 presentations. And we have 2 plenary speakers, Dr. David King, invited by Wilson Ornithological Society. And then we have invited Dr. Phil Stover, our new co-editor-in-chief for JFO. In case you didn't know or didn't say before, Phil is retiring from his longtime position at LSU and is going to give us a nice career summary. And as he joins our team, be our plenary speaker at the conference. And then just a couple of other things about the conference upcoming. If you are planning your travels, there are 3 workshops available. There is a visualizing and analyzing bird movement in R. That one seems very popular based on the registration list so far. We have turning sound into discovery, and this is going to be run by Rafa. Through wildlife in his role with wildlife acoustics. Okay, so looking at acoustic equipment as well as data interpretation. And then third, we have Beginner's Guide to Bird Tracking Technologies. And this is going to be run by Mike from Low Tech. We'll be running that one. These are all, your access to these is free with your registration. You can only register for one, as they will all happen concurrently. That first, the morning of that first day. Sorry, I think that should say this. Is the 6th correct? No, that should be the 7th, I think. And then we have a variety. Go to the website and use the QR code. Don't trust my date on that one as much. For special events, we have a number of special events also included. Some of them do require registration. Phlox will be having a meetup right before the opening reception on the 7th. Wilson will be hosting their normal LGBTQIA plus breakfast. Both of those, there is a checkbox when you register to indicate your interest in participation for those. We will also be having a very popular Meet the Editor session that will include our co-editors in chief, as well as the editors from Wilson Journal of Ornithology. That will actually be built into the scientific program. There will be field trips on the 10th, so the day after the scientific program ends, though that information is forthcoming as we work with the local Audubon to get those field trips. And then finally, there is the majority of the housing available is on campus at the university. Please do go ahead and book your rooms now to make sure. Oh, thank you, Ariel. It is the 7th for workshops. I don't know what I was thinking. So, I mean, you'll have to get there on the 6th to participate in the workshops on the 7th, I think is what I must have meant by that. But do go ahead and book your rooms. You can book your rooms as early as the 6th to come in. There is a note if you do plan to stay for the day on the 10th for field trips. Housing is not available the night of the 10th. All of this information can be found right on the website. Like I said, we are at somewhere around 99 presentations. Lots of good bird information will be coming forth. So hopefully you all plan to join us there. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. And lastly, this is very timely. Just as of today, we signed our contract with the venue for the 3rd Ornithological Congress of the Americas. And so the first Congress we had in 2017 in Iguazu Falls, Argentina, followed by a Congress in 2023 in Gramado, Brazil. And so the idea here is to connect people from the Americas in South America. These have been really successful and exciting meetings, and we're excited to hold one now in Chile. And so this will be in Guanaqueros, Coquimbo, Chile. We're excited about this. Now that we have a venue secured, and that was a lot of work. We spent the last several months talking to a lot of folks and brainstorming because the prices were coming in higher than we wanted. And we want to make sure this is an affordable cost for people in South America to attend. It's really important that we get high attendance here and support for it. So we worked hard to find a venue that was affordable, and we're going to continue to work to keep the cost down. So put a note on your calendar now. We hope to see many of you in Chile. This is going to be an exciting meeting, and we're really excited. The Brazilian Society will also be joining us, as well as, of course, the Chilean Society and the Canadian Society of Ornithologists will also be joining us in South America. So mark your calendars.
I would say if you are during that time of year, most of us will be sweating it out here in the US. And so the temperature during that time of year is somewhere around 60 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, 50s in the evening. This is an all-inclusive resort. It is beautiful, located right on the water, beachfront. So it'll be, they said it does not rain during this time of year, so we're going to hold them to it. It should be an absolutely beautiful time of year to be down there and take advantage of everything that this region of Chile has to offer.
Yep. All right, and with that, I'm going to adjourn our members meeting. So thank you all for listening to a long-winded update and us stumbling through some technology here. And with that, I would like to introduce our newly elected Vice President of AFO, Dr. Jennifer Smith, who's joining us from the field today, as I mentioned before, to talk about some of the research that she's been working on for the past several years. So with that, I will stop sharing and let our good friend Jen take over from here.
Thank you, Matt. Can you all hear? Oh, oops, sorry. Hold on, let me share my screen. That'd be the first step. Okay. All right now.
Yep, looking good, Jen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, tidy. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you, Matt, for the introduction. I am always excited to speak to this crowd. A lot of you have supported me over the years, and I consider a lot of you as my kind of ornithology family. And so it's really always a really nice pleasure to speak to you all. So as Matt said, I'm going to talk about some research which has been going on in my lab for, wow, quite a few years now. This is kind of an accumulation of about 5 years worth of work by 2 master's students who are in my lab. And so I want to give a huge shout out to Lexi Baum and Marielle Ortega, who actually defended last week. So some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today is literally brand new, and I'm kind of just like getting used to it myself. So it's kind of cool to be able to share this with you today. So as Matt said, I'm the C.C. Wynne Endowed Chair of Quail Ecology down at Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute at Texas A&M Kingsville. I work not only on quail but on doves too, which is why I'm in the valley right now. I did promise Matt that I'd bring in a chachklaka into the room and show you guys, because we sometimes trap those, but I am not going to do that. Sorry, Matt. Already let you down as vice president, so hopefully it'll be better moving forward. Okay, so today I'm going to speak about, as I said, the research we've been doing, looking at microplastic exposure in terrestrial birds and the effects on breeding performance, and a kind of the community engaged approach that we've been taking to answer some of our research questions. And so, simply put, plastic is ubiquitous in the environment, right? 8.3 billion tons of plastic have been manufactured since 1950, which is a huge amount. And a whopping 60% of that is either currently in landfills or in the natural environment. And it's not going to stop anytime soon. We know by 2050, projections suggest that there's going to be 12 billion tons of plastics manufactured to that date, which is a whopping amount. So we can kind of begin to understand how much will reside in the natural environment. And so when plastics are in the environment, hang on, what are you seeing? Are you seeing, yeah, sorry, I've got 2 screens up. I know what you're seeing. Okay, so when those plastics are in the environment, a lot of them will degrade through various different processes, so UV radiation, weathering, and physical abrasion. And this basically breaks down kind of larger pieces of plastic into what we know as microplastics, which are plastic particles between 0.1 to 5 millimeters in size. And when they're broken down through this process, we call them secondary microplastics. And it's not just the degradation of those plastics in the environment. One way we get secondary plastics is also as you drive your vehicles, particles of plastic are shedding from your tires, which then enter the environment. The other kind of big category of microplastics are what are known as primary microplastics. And they're often or always purposely manufactured as microplastics, right? And so we might think about some of the cosmetic products you use, which have those little beads in those. Those are microbeads, purposely manufactured microplastics. Another really big source of primary microplastics is clothing, right? And so a lot of your clothing, unless it's 100% natural material such as cotton, has plastic fibers in it. And then also we have nurdles, which if you're in the south of Texas, you're probably very familiar with these. This is a hub of manufacturing plastic nurdles in the US. And so basically what they are these small little plastic particles, which are the precursors. They're melted down to form larger pieces of plastic. Now we can begin to understand how many are in the environment, right? And what's concerning is that when they enter the environment, our wildlife, our birds, are exposed to these microplastic. And most research in this regard has focused on seabirds, on marine birds, such as this Lason's albatross, right? And this is a really, it's kind of an interesting picture. I wouldn't say it's cool. It's actually quite disturbing. But this albatross did not ever make it to the ocean or make it to adulthood. It died because it ingested so many microplastics, right? And so there's a lot of research which has focused on seabirds because of concerns about plastics in the oceans. And there's a lot of different statistics out there which suggest that anywhere from 35 to 90% of seabirds have been exposed to plastics at some point in their life. However, in comparison, we don't know much about terrestrial birds. And given kind of declines in many families of terrestrial birds kind of recently, or at least over the last 50 years, there's increasing concerns about plastics and potential effects that they're having on terrestrial birds. And so there have been a number of studies kind of more recently that have begun to answer questions about exposure of birds to terrestrial birds to microplastics. However, there's still really big missing gaps. Those studies have suffered because of small sample sizes and small taxonomic focus. And so one way to develop a kind of more robust understanding of microplastic exposure in terrestrial birds is to take what we call a traits-based approach. And to do that, we can kind of look at different traits that might predict exposure of birds to microplastics, such as foraging or feeding kind of strategies. And so, for example, we might anticipate that a black-throated green warbler, which is an insectivore, might have less microplastics exposed to it compared to something like an oriole, which is a frugivore, which again might be differentially exposed compared to something like a swift. And then we might imagine that something like an omnivore might be really exposed to microplastics simply because it eats in all different kinds of places and has all different dietary items. We might anticipate that something like a hummingbird would have less microplastic exposure simply because of what it feeds on, compared to something like a granivore, such as a cardinal, northern cardinal, that because it feeds on the ground, we might anticipate that it's got high exposure to plastics simply because there's loads of plastics in the soil, right? And so taking this traits-based approach is kind of a robust way to understand microplastic exposure more. And once we've kind of established those relationships between what kind of birds are exposed to plastics, we can use those relationships to look at other birds and then predict what other birds might be exposed to plastics. And of course, this might be really important for conservation purposes. Okay. Sorry, I just realized I'm sharing my bar there with you guys. Okay. Another thing that we don't know much about is the potential effects that exposure might have on birds. And there's two kind of broad ways that we can kind of hypothesize microplastics might affect birds. One is through kind of physical effects, whereby an animal eats plastics and maybe those plastics obstruct the GI tract, give it a false sense that it's full, it's eaten enough food, so in other words, satiety. And these two can impact growth, which ultimately could affect survival. There's also a whole suite of chemicals which are associated with plastics. So not only are some chemicals introduced to plastics during the manufacturing process, so things like flame retardants and things like phthalates and things like that. When plastics are in the environment, they can also absorb other chemicals such as heavy metals. And so these pieces of plastic in the environment become kind of this really big community of different chemicals. And those chemicals can have a lot of effects on birds. For example, they can disrupt the hormone system. So in other words, the endocrine system. They can reduce calcium availability. And collectively, these different effects could have effects on things like behavior, on growth of birds and development of embryos, and also on things like clutch and egg characteristics. So there's a lot of concern about microplastics, not only because birds are exposed to them, but the potential impact that those plastics are having on birds. Another thing we don't really know is whether terrestrial birds can serve as bioindicators of plastic pollution, okay? And so if anyone's taken any classes about bioindicators, you'll know that there's a series of different things that birds or animals need to have to be reliable bioindicators. And so, for example, they need to provide reliable information on the condition of the environment. They need to be responsive to environmental change. So in this case, kind of plastics. They need to be easy to observe, which some birds definitely are, and they need to be common. And so we might anticipate if the amount of plastics a bird ingests kind of changes across the landscape, then predictably with environmental burden, then it might serve as a really good bioindicator. And importantly, if they can serve as bioindicators, then they could be used to highlight changes in microplastics across a gradient where you might anticipate that they change. And in the context of what I'm going to talk about today, this could be really important if we're thinking about environmental injustice issues. Okay. And so moving forward, I'm going to present kind of two areas of research that my graduate students myself have been doing over the last 5 years now, which seems quite a long time. So part one is looking at species-specific exposure using a traits-based approach, and this was led by the very wonderful Lexi Baum when I was at UTSA, previously to my position now. And then the second is going to look at site-specific exposure of birds and breeding productivity. And this was led by one of my former graduate students, Mario Ortega, who some of you know. And going back to the title of my talk, I think I included the words community engaged approach. One kind of really cool thing about these two projects, and a very important component of these two projects, is that we integrated science, citizen science, with an aim to engage community members through that research in STEM via avian ecology. So that's a kind of very pivotal, kind of important part of this research. So moving on to some of the stuff that Lexi did. So her first objective was to evaluate microplastic exposure of terrestrial birds using GI tracts. And then we predicted that because plastic pollution is widespread, most GI tracts, regardless of the species, would contain microplastics. The second objective was to assess linkages between microplastic exposure and a trait foraging strategies in this case. So we predicted that microplastic exposure would be higher in ground foragers with omnivorous and granivorous diets simply because of the sheer amount of microplastics in soil that birds might be exposed to when they're kind of foraging in those locations. And so to do this study, we basically used birds that were collected through bird building collision projects. And the way we incorporated citizen science into this project was that we had members of the UTSA chapter of the Wildlife Society run all of the different surveys for us, which not only gave them experience, but also kind of they served as citizen scientists in that capacity. It was opportunistic sampling when they could do it, and the efforts were concentrated in kind of the migratory periods, which is when we anticipated there'd be most bird building collisions in spring 2022 and spring 2024. We then also supplemented the birds that we were able to collect on UTSA campus through individuals that we were able to, we partnered with the biodiversity research and teaching lessons at Texas A&M College Station, and they kind of supplemented our resources there, which was very useful. And a lot of those carcasses were also through another citizen science program known as Lights Out Texas. So integrating citizen science a lot in this project. And once we had a good idea of all the different species that were available in the collection, we selected 9 different species for which we had at least the minimum of 12 individuals representing different foraging strategies across those species. And so I'll just go through them very briefly here. The first was a black and white warbler, which is an insectivore. It's a bark forager. Common yellowthroat insectivore again, but kind of forages in different areas. House wren, insectivore, again, forages in different areas again. Nashville warbler, which is kind of more of a foliage gleaner in the upper vegetation. We then, it's very important to us that we had kind of an aerial insectivore, so purple martin represented that species. Great-tailed grackle, the omnivore, again, a ground forager. Cedar waxwing represented our frugivore. White-throated sparrow granivore and a ground forager. And last but not least, we also incorporated ruby-throated hummingbird as our hovering nectivore. So once we had, I think it was 113 GI tracks, Lexi did a lot of lab work, and so that included washing and drying all the GI tracks, and then using a chemical digestion process to extract the microplastics from the kind of organic material. Then we use vacuum filtration to again separate the plastics from the solutions. And very importantly, we also took quite a number of steps to account for potential contamination in the lab and in samples. And if anyone wants to talk about that at any point, we can do that. So once we were able to extract those microplastics, we used actually 3 different techniques to kind of answer the question, are they actually plastics? So the first thing we did was we used kind of a standard microscopy approach where we characterized each particle in type, shape, size, and color. We then used a Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy machine, which allowed us to identify the specific polymers that each particle was made of. And then we used kind of a standard hot needle test, which allows you to kind of look at the behavior of plastic. So if they melt, they're plastic. So moving into some results here. And so on the x-axis, we have species. And then on the y-axis, we have the percentage of birds which had microplastics in them. And so this graph really clearly shows that most birds had microplastics in their GI tract. So about 65% overall had microplastics in them. What was surprising to us was that, the bird which had the most number of individuals with plastics in their GI tracts was the cedar waxwing. We know that's a frugivore. It can supplement its diet with insects, but we're kind of thinking that a lot of these microplastics did come through fruit. And certainly when you look at the literature to do with kind of fruit that humans are consuming, we know that agricultural fruit, etc., has a lot of microplastics in it. Don't think about that too much, because every time you eat fruit, you'll think about plastics, which is something that I now do. Yeah, but kind of across the species, a lot of them had microplastics. So no surprise, for example, that great-tailed grackles, which is our supermarket trash bird, had a lot of plastics in it. But interestingly, if we look at the specific number of pieces of plastic in GI tracts, it's perhaps no surprise that great-tailed grackle, out of all the different species, had the most number of pieces of plastic in its GI tract. For anyone who knows about the great-tailed grackles in general, they kind of hang out in urban car lots and will eat plastic, basically, which is hence why we see a lot of plastic in their guts. And then if we look to the right, increasingly insectivores become more common. So they were the least subject to plastic ingestion. We did some statistical analysis on this, where we used generalized linear models, where ruby-throated hummingbirds were the reference level. And so we know birds, so great-tailed grackles, cedar waxwing, and purple martin had significantly more plastics in them compared to ruby-throated hummingbirds. And then Nashville warbler had significantly less microplastics in it compared to ruby-throated hummingbirds and any species to the left on that graph. When we looked at the results from the FTIR, so to remember, the FTIR allowed us to identify the specific polymers. It showed that polyester was the most commonly identified polymer, and rayon. Both of these plastics are very, very, very common in clothing. The other piece of that kind of puzzle is that the most common type of plastic were fibers, again from clothing, which suggests that plastic materials from our clothing are entering the environment through a number of different pathways. And so I think that's something we should also think about when we're thinking about kind of cheap fashion and all those kind of things. So a pretty scary result, but also pretty informative. And so we did that research. We saw large amounts of exposure in animals. And so when Marielle started in my lab, we had a bunch of different questions that we were interested in asking, right, leading on from Lexi's work. And so we're specifically interested in, okay, if birds are exposed, then what's the impact on those birds? The other thing that we're interested in is, can birds serve as bioindicators, right? And so is there site-specific exposure in a predictable way given environmental burdens? And so as Marielle came on, she had a series of different questions. The first was, are birds differentially exposed to plastics across a socio-economic gradient? And I'll come on to kind of explain a little bit more about that kind of socio-economic gradient part in a second. Does plastic exposure affect breeding performance? And can birds serve as bioindicators? And so I'll just go through some hypotheses that we put forward. Okay, so the first question, as I said, was, does avian plastic exposure vary across a socio-economic gradient? And so we predicted that areas of lower socioeconomic status would have higher amounts of plastic pollution for various reasons, but one of the main reasons being because of historic redlining incidences in San Antonio, where some of those lower socioeconomic areas would have had lower investment in those areas, specifically in relation to waste management. And I'll touch a bit more on that kind of in a couple of slides here. And because of this variation in plastic across a socioeconomic gradient, we predicted that birds in those areas of lower socioeconomic status would have higher exposure to plastics. So the next question was, does plastic exposure affect breeding performance? And so we predicted that in areas which have higher amounts of plastic, because of things like endocrine disruption, we predicted that those birds would experience reduced clutch sizes and hatching success. So the third part of Marielle's project was kind of trying to ascertain if birds can serve as bioindicators of plastic pollution. And so to do that, we also collected soil samples at sites where we were monitoring birds, and we looked at whether or not that is the case. And so to conduct this study, we picked 3 different areas in San Antonio, South Texas, which we anticipated would have different levels of plastic pollution based on historic redlining zones, which were established in the 1930s, and also current socioeconomic status defined by median household income, where these are shown on the 2 maps in this slide. And so for those who don't know too much about redlining, so it was a practice which was put forward by the Homeowners Loan Corporation in the 1930s, which effectively rated neighborhoods to indicate the level of security for real estate investment in the surveyed cities, in this case San Antonio. And they basically ranked different areas from best through to hazardous. And as a result of that, towns invested different amounts in those different areas, where the areas considered most hazardous would have had the least amount of financial services in those areas, which include kind of resources towards waste management, which has been shown to have resulted in lower ranked areas having kind of less green spaces, for example, more impervious amounts of cover, higher pollution burdens, and a bigger kind of history of illegal dumping. So kind of that was why we thought some of these areas would have higher amounts of microplastic pollution compared to kind of the more wealthy areas. And we want to make it very clear that this is no kind of comment on the people that are living in these areas. It's due to kind of the resources and investment kind of broadly in these areas over time. Okay, so once we had those nest boxes established in those different areas, we incorporated citizen science as a large component of the project. So those members of the public were monitoring nest boxes in their backyards and looking at things like hatch date, clutch size, etc. Then Marielle and our team out of the lab went and collected various different samples to look at plastics. So we collected fecal samples from nestlings. We also collected nests at the end of the breeding season, and also any unhatched eggs that were available to us. At the same time, as I mentioned before, we collected soil samples around those nest boxes, which allowed us to kind of compare microplastics in the environment compared to kind of plastics we were seeing in kind of biological samples from the birds. And then we spent, Marielle and Lexi spent a lot of time in the lab doing some fantastic work, working out how many microplastics were in all of those different samples. And then we used those approaches I talked about before to determine whether or not we had microplastics in the samples. And so moving on to some quick results here. As I said, this was presented by Marielle this week, so this is really hot off the press, which is kind of cool. And so we had 44 households, which were owned by citizen scientists in the project. And we had 138 nest boxes total, with about a 25% occupancy across those 2 years of study. Most of the birds were either black-crested titmice, Bewick's wrens, or house sparrows. We had one Carolina wren. And through those efforts, we were able to collect 51 nests, 53 fecal samples, and 19 unhatched eggs, and then 27 soil samples. So moving on to some results here. And so the big take-home message is that plastics were in a lot of nests. And I should say these weren't microplastics. We actually also looked at macroplastics, so pieces of plastic which were bigger than 5 millimeters. And so 86% of nests that we looked at contained plastic, which was quite scary in a way. And the species which had the most amount of plastic in the nests were house sparrows compared to those other species that we looked at. When we looked at nests across that socioeconomic gradient, we did not see any impact of neighborhood, so socioeconomic status, on plastic. Simply put, plastics were everywhere and they were in nests everywhere. When we looked at fecal samples, it was the same kind of story. Approximately 50% of the fecal samples that we looked at had plastics, but there was no clear pattern of plastic variation across that socioeconomic gradient. Another kind of cool thing that Marielle did, as I mentioned, was she collected unhatched eggs, and then we looked at microplastics in those. We were able to collect 19 unhatched eggs. Of those, about a quarter of them had plastics in them. This is really cool because this is actually, to our knowledge, unless anyone has seen any other studies more recently, the first study that has shown plastics in wild bird eggs. We know they're in chicken eggs. They've been found in turtle eggs. But this is kind of a new study looking at them in wild bird eggs, which is kind of pretty exciting. When we looked at plastic exposure in relation to breeding productivity, we have found no effect. And then, as I said, the last part of the project was to kind of compare the amount of plastics in the environment with those different metrics that we looked at. However, unfortunately, we had a number of issues with lab work, looking at those plastics in soil. There's a lot of different procedures out there right now in the literature, but I think the kind of scientific community as such is still very in its infancy of working out the best method to quantify plastics in soil samples. And so whilst it kind of worked, we know it didn't work well enough to be able to say anything about correlations between environmental burden and also exposure of birds. So looking at some key takeaways here, sadly, most birds were exposed to plastics in our study, across both studies. Omnivores and granivores had the higher exposure compared to other species. There was no effect on breeding performance. And it's unsure at the moment if birds can serve as bioindicators yet. And the reason I say yet is because we're going to do some additional surveys this summer and some additional lab work to see if we kind of work that part of the puzzle out. And kind of bringing it back to community engagement and citizen science, I was hoping I could present some of this research today, but we're still doing some qualitative assessments of using some social science data that we collected from our participants. And that research is basically kind of answering questions about the effect of being a citizen science on things like nature engagement and connectiveness to nature, and then participation in STEM more broadly. And so hopefully we'll have that out as a publication at the end of the summer. But kind of the big take home message from what we're seeing, at least, is that the community engaged approaches that we took is having a really positive effect on participants and interest in science and nature in general. And so with that, I'll leave with some acknowledgements here. Of course, we are indebted to the Biodiversity Research and Teaching Collections at Texas A&M, especially our partners, Heather, Gary, and Keith Andringa. Of course, citizen scientists who collected a lot of those samples for us. wonderful members of the UTSA TWS chapter at University of Texas San Antonio, my wonderful lab members of the Urban Bird Project team, which formed kind of a bigger part of this project, citizen scientists in San Antonio, and then, of course, last but not least, various funding sources that helped fund this work. And with that, I am happy to take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay.
That was awesome. Thank you, Jen. Questions?
Thank you, guys. Mm-hmm.
I'll get going with a quick one as people are thinking. I'm curious what you think the conservation implications are for that microplastic being transferred into eggs. Like, what do we see in the poultry industry that might translate to health and survival and fitness of birds in the wild?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a lot. Actually, the answer can be quite complex there. I think it depends what the plastic is. I think it depends on is the community the right word of chemicals in that plastic. We know a lot of them can disrupt the endocrine system, which can have effects on things like development of embryos and things like that. They've certainly shown in the kind of more chemical literature that can be the case. Decreased hatching success because of poorer development of embryos. We didn't see any effect of hatching success and plastic in our study, and we did look at that. But then again, we don't know the specific plastics which were in the eggs we looked at. We don't know the chemical composition. We don't know the thresholds that birds need to be exposed to those plastics to have deleterious effects. I think probably more lab-based work is needed to understand that. But that would be my concern. I think plastics is one thing, but I think it's also very important to consider the chemicals that are absorbing to those plastics in the environment. So I think it'd be site specific.
Great, thanks. Cecilia has a question in the chat. Do the macroplastics have any effect on arthropods in the nest, for example, ectoparasites?
Great question. I don't know. Again, maybe it depends on the chemicals which are on the plastics would be my guess. I'm sure maybe some of them can conserve. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what chemical would. I was thinking that maybe some of them could kind of ward off insects, but I don't know. It's a great question. I think we don't know at all, but definitely something that we could look into. I will say, if you saw in the graph, even though a large proportion of those nests did contain plastics, the average I think was about 3%, 3 or 4% weight was plastic, and so a lot of them have plastics in, but at least the nests we looked at didn't have a lot of plastic. I think the most amount was like a house sparrow, which is about 10%. The highest amount was about 10% plastic. However, having said that, and I'm sure many people in this room have seen nests where it's kind of almost all plastic, right? So I've seen great-tailed grackle nests in like car parks, which are like, golly, like 80% plastic. I think that might be a different story. But yeah, I don't know about arthropods. It's a brilliant question, though.
Yeah. Any other questions for Jen?
Yeah, Jen, what part of the egg was that photo? Was that with the eggshell?
No, good question as well. And so we basically cracked the egg open and homogenized it. So it was a combination of the yolk and albumin, and did not consider the shell. However, if I was going to do this again, and maybe if we do this in the future, I really want to separate the yolk from the albumin, because I think that would provide important insight into the pathway by which plastics are getting into eggs.
Yeah,
and then the shell too.
That was an incredible photograph.
Yeah.
I think Journal of Field Ornithology would be a great place to publish something like that.
Funny you should say that. That was a question at the end of Marielle's defense last week, was like, where are we going to publish this? And I suggested JFO.
Excellent.
There you go. Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So Jen, when you think about the plastics that you guys observed, in whichever context you guys observed them, did you have any sense of where they came from? I'm assuming that things like colors and fragmentation would give you some indication.
Yeah. For Lexi's work, we think a lot of them were fibers from clothing, just made based on like morphology and things like that. What was really cool was that when we did the work with the FTIR, sometimes because it has a library, right, and it compares the kind of the composition of your plastic against the library it has. Some of them were wildly specific. Some of them were like Joanne's fabric was one, right? And so we know that some of these are coming from very specific sources. But in general, we don't know where they're coming from. We can kind of just hazard a guess based on the fact they're like fibers and polyester or rayon. And then with Marielle's stuff, it was pretty hard because a lot of the microplastics were actually too small to put through that machine. And so that was kind of challenging in itself. But again, quite a lot of fibers. I think most of them in eggs were actually fragments. But the source of those, it was very hard because they were way too small to like determine polymer. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, there's things that secondary stuff from dyes and in the plastics. I'm just trying to think about what remains after you've fragmentized a plastic and put it out in the environment for a while. What remains that you can extract from it in any sort of biological sense? That I feel like a lot of this plastic that I've seen, it's gone through so much, and it'd be interesting just to think about what's already seeped out in whatever water system it might have been or something. But now you have the actual
100%, yeah. And like conversely, right? Because they're going to change all the time. I mean, we were thinking of doing an experiment actually where we're going to have like plastics in the environment and like look at how kind of chemical composition changed over time in different systems, which I think would be quite interesting. Yeah, you're right. I mean, chemicals could come and go. I mean, depending on what they are and how like readily they absorb to those plastics. Also things like algal, bacteria composition, all kinds of things like that, which could inadvertently have effects too. And then the other interesting thing is like many of these papers coming out, including ourselves, we characterize them by things like color. And then kind of we were having a discussion with a chemist last week, and he was actually saying that might not be relevant because we know that plastics lose color over time. So how relevant is it to measure things like that? But I think plastic should be kind of thought of as a stable, not kind of stable, but like a stable over time piece of like material, because I think it's changing constantly in terms of things like chemical color composition, things that are growing on it like bacteria and algae. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a field which is in its infancy where it can be taken in a lot of different directions, which I'm excited to see.
Yeah, and I think the trait-based thing is exciting, but he also might extrapolate from that to what are the pHs that it experiences in these different birds, because within a given dietary trait, depending on what you're eating, which seeds you're eating, what you're doing with your detoxifying, et cetera. So that plastic might then be exposed to very different degradation processes specific to that bird.
It's funny because I actually asked that question in someone's defense last week. About things like vultures and the pH in the systems and like what you might predict in terms of recovery rates out of birds. Yeah, good thoughts.
Very nice.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry, I can't get your chat like Matt.
That's all right.
Yeah, Tim. Hey, Tim. Tim's down the road from me right now. Sorry. Why was cedar waxwing so high? Yeah, I was shocked. Again, so for context, all the cedar waxwing were, Tim, you'll remember when you were down here, the snowpocalypse of South Texas a few years ago, where it was kind of unusually cold. We had a lot of cedar waxwing brought in, and so yeah, I wonder if they were like eating a lot of like fruit in people's backyards at that time, because they were all collected in, I think, either in San Antonio or Austin, so in urban areas. So that would be my guess. We do know they supplement their diet with insects, which could be like trophic transfer. But I think the big take-home message is we don't know. Yeah, same, Rebecca, same with hummingbirds. Again, surprising, but they do supplement their diet with insects. And some other people have suggested that maybe plastics were coming from the feeders. I don't know how true that is. I think we don't know, you know? But there's lots of different pathways by which birds could be exposed. But the cedar waxwings was surprising, for sure.
Jen, just as a random thought, a lot of aerial insects that at least some of our swallows and whatnot are going after have an aquatic larval phase.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so where they get them might be a much more direct route from where we know a lot of plastics end up.
For sure. And we know that if you look at, like, there's studies to show that variation between just aquatic and terrestrial insects, where they're emerging from, aquatic insects have a lot more microplastics in them compared to terrestrial inverts. And so when we look at the purple martin result, it's kind of perhaps not surprising that they had quite a lot of microplastics in them.
The cedar waxwings I know of hawk over rivers and ponds.
Right, exactly. So I think that's another really, really exciting area to look at, is kind of those pathways and if we can establish those for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Jen. And thank you to
course.
everyone for joining us. Yeah, great talk. So let's give everyone a round of applause for Jen. And yeah, hopefully we see many of you in Newport later this summer. So take care.
Thanks, everyone. I will see you all soon. You're going to catch some birds. See you guys.